Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep, not into the ocean itself, but into the arid coastal deserts of ancient Peru to uncover how a fascinating civilization, the Moche, viewed the humble seashell as something far more precious than a simple beach souvenir. Imagine for a moment you're walking along a windswept beach today, perhaps the Outer Banks, or a sunny stretch in California, and you spot a perfectly spiraled conch. You might pick it up, admire its colors, maybe even take it home. But for the Moche, who flourished between roughly 100 and 800 AD, certain shells, particularly the spiny oyster called spondylus, were like gold, or perhaps even more valuable, woven into the very fabric of their power, ritual, and daily life. Frankly, with their elaborate human sacrifices and rather intense depictions of warfare, you probably wouldn't have survived their Tuesday afternoon social. It was a different vibe, let's just say. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel and lets me know you appreciate these little journeys into the past. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's always cool to see where everyone is tuning in from as we collectively drift off. Now turn down the lights, turn on a fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a sun-baked plain, the air shimmering with heat. Before you, massive adobe pyramids, or huacas as they are known, rise from the desert floor, their mud brick faces weathered by centuries of sun and wind. This is the heartland of the Moche, a collection of autonomous yet culturally linked valleys stretching along the northern coast of Peru. The Pacific Ocean crashes nearby, a constant rhythmic hum against the silence of the desert. It's a stark landscape, yet the Moche transformed it with sophisticated irrigation canals, coaxing life from the arid soil, cultivating maize, beans, and squash. You can almost smell the dry earth, the faint salt tang in the air, and perhaps the distant aroma of cooking fires. You notice the people around you. Their clothing is vibrant, woven cotton textiles rich with geometric patterns and depictions of animals, warriors, and intricate ceremonies. But what really catches your eye are the ornaments. Gold, silver, and copper gleam from ear spools, nose rings, and elaborate headdresses. And there, amidst the precious metals, are the seashells. Not just any shells, but predominantly the spondylus shell, with its distinctive thorny exterior and vibrant red, orange, or purple lip. These aren't just casually strung necklaces. These are displays of serious status and spiritual connection. The Moche, you see, didn't have a written language as we know it. Instead, their story is told through their incredible art, particularly their ceramics. These aren't your average pottery class creations. They are masterpieces of realism, depicting everything from everyday life to complex mythological scenes. And in these scenes, spondylus shells are everywhere, often shown being presented as offerings, worn by high-status individuals, or even anthropomorphized into divine figures. It's clear these shells were a major deal. One of the mainstream historical facts about the Moche is their incredible skill in metallurgy and craftwork, and the spondylus shell was frequently incorporated into these valuable items, often inlaid with turquoise or gold, signifying its immense worth alongside these traditionally precious materials. You walk towards one of the larger huacas, perhaps the Huaca de la Luna, the pyramid of the moon. The air grows cooler as you approach its massive base. You see remnants of brightly painted murals depicting fierce deities, warriors in combat, and scenes of sacrifice. It's a little intense, like walking onto the set of a very serious historical drama. The Moche believed these shells, particularly spondylus, came from the warm northern waters of Ecuador, a considerable distance away. This made them an exotic import, and their acquisition required long-distance trade or arduous expeditions, often by sea on reed rafts. Imagine the journey, bobbing along the Pacific, to acquire something that looked a bit like an alien artichoke, but was worth more than most things you owned. Now here's a strange detail for you. Some Moche burials have been found with individuals interred with spondylus shells placed in their hands, or even replacing their very eyeballs in some artistic depictions. It suggests a profound connection between the shell and the journey to the afterlife, perhaps as a form of spiritual currency or a guide. It's a bit like being buried with your credit card, but infinitely more symbolic, and let's be honest, way cooler looking than a piece of plastic. The effort to obtain spondylus was immense. These shells live in deeper waters, requiring divers to plunge to depths of up to 50 meters. It was a dangerous work, fraught with peril. This inherent risk and the distance they traveled only added to their mystique and value. You might wonder why this particular shell was so important. Scholars believe its blood-red color was associated with life, fertility, and the life-giving waters brought by El Niño rains, which, though often destructive, were also essential for agriculture in this dry region. The shell's arrival often coincided with these warming waters. However, historians still debate whether the primary value of spondylus was purely symbolic and religious, or if it also functioned as a form of standardized currency in trade networks. While it clearly held immense ritualistic importance, its consistent appearance in high-status burials and its presence in regions far from its origin point towards a role in facilitating exchange, much like precious metals or cacao beans in other ancient American cultures. Was it their version of a Rolex, a sacred offering, or a bit of both? The lines, as they often are in ancient cultures, were likely beautifully blurred. The Moche didn't do simple, apparently. Their entire world was a complex tapestry of the sacred and the mundane, and seashells were a glittering thread running right through it. You can almost hear the hushed reverence as a new shipment of these marine treasures arrives, the rough, spiny exteriors hiding the brilliant colors within, a promise of favor from the gods and a statement of power on earth. Okay, so you're still there, near the imposing huaca, the weight of Moche belief pressing in around you, carried on the desert wind. You've seen how spondylus shells aren't just pretty baubles. They're heavy with meaning, with divine connection, with earthly power. You begin to notice more subtle details. It's not just the whole shells that are prized, but also fragments, carefully worked pieces, inlaid into larger compositions, tiny beads, intricate mosaics on pectorals, and even fine powder, perhaps used as a sacred pigment or offering. The Moche were masters of making the most of a precious resource. Nothing went to waste, especially not something wrested from the ocean depths at great peril. Imagine the workshops of Moche artisans. You can almost hear the gentle clink, clink, clink of tools as they meticulously shape these shells. The air would be thick with fine, chalky dust, the scent of the sea still clinging to the raw materials. These artisans weren't just craftsmen, they were conduits of cultural meaning, transforming a natural object into a potent symbol. They'd be the ancient equivalent of high-end jewelers, but with a much more direct line to the gods, and probably better job security, assuming they didn't displease a lord or a deity. One wrong cut, and you might end up as the main event in next week's ceremony. Kidding, mostly. The mainstream historical fact here is the clear association of Spondylus with the Moche elite and their ceremonial life. Excavations of Moche tombs, like those at Sipan, have revealed astonishing hordes of Spondylus objects buried with powerful lords and priests. These weren't just a few shells. We're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands, meticulously arranged, often forming part of complex ritual paraphernalia. The Lord of Sipan himself was adorned with spondylus bead pectorals, bracelets, and surrounded by offerings that included vast quantities of these shells, underscoring his supreme status and his role as an intermediary with the divine realm. It was the ancient equivalent of being buried with your entire stock portfolio, if your stocks were also divine intermediaries. You follow a procession of priests, their robes rustling, their faces stern and focused. They carry offerings, and prominent among them are spondylus shells, some whole, some worked into elaborate ornaments. They move towards a ceremonial plaza, and you can sense the anticipation in the air. The Moche world was deeply intertwined with cycles of nature, the sun, the moon, the agricultural seasons, and importantly, the unpredictable Pacific currents that brought both bounty and disaster in the form of El Nino events. Spondylus, originating from the warmer northern waters that heralded these climatic shifts, was seen as a powerful conduit to the forces that controlled these phenomena. Offering spondylus was perhaps a way to appease these forces, to ensure fertility, or to understand the coming changes. Now for a strange detail that adds another layer to this marine mystery. Some interpretations of Moche iconography suggest that the divers who procured spondylus shells were not just laborers, but held a special, perhaps even liminal, ritual status. Depictions show them with features that blur the line between human and marine creature, sometimes with gills or fins. These weren't just guys going for a deep swim. They were braving a spiritual threshold, entering the realm of the sea gods to retrieve these sacred objects. Historians still puzzle over the exact rituals and beliefs surrounding these divers. Were they captives forced into this dangerous task, or a specialized caste with unique spiritual protections and responsibilities? Or maybe they just had really good breath-holding techniques and a high tolerance for near-death experiences. The importance of these shells created a demand that fueled extensive networks. It wasn't just the Moche who valued spondylus. Its allure extended up and down the Andean spine, from Ecuador to Chile. This spondylus trail was a vital economic and cultural artery, but the Moche seem to have been particularly adept at consolidating their access and use of it. You can picture Moche traders, or perhaps emissaries of the lords, bartering for these shells, offering fine Moche ceramics, textiles, or metalwork in exchange. It was a sophisticated system, driven by a demand that was as much spiritual as it was material. This leads us to an ongoing scholarly debate. To what extent did the Moche actively control the spondylus trade routes, and how did this control contribute to their political power and influence over neighboring groups? Some scholars propose that Moche elites monopolized the acquisition and distribution of spondylus, using it as a tool of statecraft to cement alliances, reward loyalty, or display their superior connection to the cosmos. Others suggest a more decentralized network where various groups participated in the trade, with the Moche being major consumers and skilled artisans rather than outright controllers of the entire supply chain. Pinning down the exact economic levers of a civilization without written records is like trying to assemble flat pack furniture with only half the instructions. Frustrating, and you're never entirely sure you've got it right. As you absorb all this, you realize the ocean itself must have been a vast living temple to the Moche. It wasn't just a source of food or a barrier to travel, it was the origin of their most sacred symbolic material. The crashing waves you hear in the distance aren't just background noise, they're a reminder of the powerful forces the Moche sought to understand and appease, with the beautiful, spiny spondylus shell as their primary ambassador. The setting sun casts long shadows from the huacas, and the desert air begins to cool. The gleam of gold and the deep red of shell still catch the fading light, hinting at the treasures and beliefs that lay buried here for centuries. Okay, the desert air is noticeably cooler now, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky above the silhouettes of the huacas. You've seen the elite, the ceremonies, the artisans, all touched by the iridescence of spondylus. But the Moche world wasn't solely built on this one spiny treasure from the sea. While spondylus was undoubtedly the VIP, the celebrity shell, if you will, constantly hounded by the paparazzi of priests and lords, other marine gifts found their place in the grand Moche scheme of things. You wander away from the main ceremonial centers, deeper into what might have been a bustling settlement. The scent of dust and something faintly fishy hangs in the air, perhaps from fishing nets drying nearby, or the remnants of a communal meal. Here you see more common shells, smaller conches, smooth scallop shells, perhaps even humble mussels. While they didn't carry the same weight of divine authority as spondylus, they still played their roles. You see them adorning simpler clothing, perhaps used as tools, scrapers or small containers, or even ground into lime for processing coca leaves, a practice common in the Andes for ritual and daily use. It's a reminder that even in a society obsessed with a superstar shell, the everyday, hard-working mollusks still had their part to play. They were the backup singers to Spondylus's headline act. One mainstream historical fact is the Moche use of large conch shells, often of the Strombus genus, as trumpets or patutus. These weren't just for calling the kids in for dinner, these were sacred instruments. Imagine the deep, resonant blast of a conch shell trumpet echoing across the plazas, signaling the start of a ceremony, the arrival of an important figure, or perhaps even a call to arms. Archaeologists have found these shell trumpets in elite burials and depicted them frequently in Moche art, often played by elaborately dressed figures, sometimes with supernatural attributes. The sound itself was likely considered powerful, a voice that could carry across distances and perhaps even reach the ears of the gods. It's like their version of a vuvuzela, but with much more spiritual gravitas and, thankfully, a more sonorous tone. As you ponder this, you notice the intricate details in the remnants of murals and friezes on some of the adobe walls. While spondylus itself was too precious to be used as common building material, its image and the imagery of the sea were everywhere. Wave motifs, marine animals, and even representations of shell divers adorned the sacred spaces. And here's a rather strange detail. In some architectural contexts, archaeologists have found caches of miniature shell offerings, tiny, perfectly formed spondylus or other shells, sometimes crafted from stone or metal, buried within the walls or floors of temples and elite residences. These weren't for show. They were hidden, embedded within the sacred architecture itself, perhaps to sanctify the building or to perpetually offer their power to the structure and its inhabitants. It's like finding a tiny ancient Easter egg, if Easter eggs were potent religious symbols. The Moche relationship with the sea, and by extension its shells, was deeply tied to their understanding of cosmic balance and renewal. The spondylus, with its connection to the warm waters of El Niño, symbolized both the potential for devastation, floods, disruption of marine life, and the promise of agricultural fertility, rain in an arid land. This duality is a hallmark of many ancient belief systems. It wasn't just about good versus evil, but about the necessary interplay of creation and destruction. This brings us to another fascinating scholarly debate. Did the Moche actively try to predict El Niño events using the arrival or abundance of spondylus shells, or was the association primarily ritualistic and symbolic, used to explain and sanctify these powerful climatic shifts after they occurred? Some researchers argue that keen observation of marine indicators, including the presence of warm water species like spondylus, could have given the Moche an early warning system of sorts, allowing them to prepare or perform placatory rituals. Others believe that while they undoubtedly recognized the correlation, the primary function of spondylus in this context was to provide a mythological and ritual framework for coping with these unpredictable and often catastrophic events. Were they ancient meteorologists with a penchant for ornate jewelry, or was it more about managing societal anxiety through shared belief? The jury is still out, sifting through shell middens and ceramic interpretations. You look out towards the dark line of the Pacific, the rhythmic sound of the waves a constant presence. The Moche managed to build a complex society in this challenging environment for nearly 800 years, and their reverence for the treasures of the sea, especially the vibrant spondylus, was a key thread in their cultural tapestry. It was more than decoration. It was currency, status, a divine connection, and a way of making sense of a world ruled by powerful, often unpredictable forces. The stars above are brilliant now in the clear desert sky, the same stars that shone down on the Moche as they navigated their lives, their beliefs, and their profound relationship with the ocean and its spiny, colorful gifts. The night has truly settled now, a vast, inky canvas pricked with distant starlight. The cool desert air is a relief after the imagined heat of the Moche day. You've seen how spondylus and other shells were more than just adornment. They were a vital current running through Moche life, connecting them to their gods, their environment, and each other. But how did these precious marine treasures, particularly the highly coveted spondylus, actually make their way from the depths of the ocean, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away, into the hands of Moche lords and artisans? It wasn't exactly Amazon Prime back then. Let's imagine you're now accompanying one of these spondylus procurement expeditions. You're heading north, away from the Moche heartland, towards the warmer waters off the coast of what is now Ecuador. The journey itself is an undertaking. You might be on a surprisingly sturdy watercraft made of bundled totora reeds, known as a cabalito de totora, or little reed horse. The mainstream historical fact is that the Moche were adept coastal navigators and fishermen, and these reed boats, still used in parts of Peru today, were their primary vessels for exploiting marine resources. While often used for fishing relatively close to shore, it's highly probable that larger, more robust versions were employed for longer coastal voyages, essential for trading or directly acquiring goods like spondylus. You can feel the rhythmic sway of the reed boat, the cool spray of the Pacific, the sun beating down. The coastline is a blur of arid cliffs and sparse vegetation. This isn't a pleasure cruise. It's a serious, often dangerous business venture. The destination is a specific stretch of coastline where spondylus princeps or spondylus calcifer thrive, clinging to rocks in deeper waters. This is where the specialists come in, the divers. As we touched upon, these individuals were likely more than just strong swimmers. There was a certain mystique, a ritual importance to their role. You watch as they prepare, perhaps with specific rites or offerings made to the sea gods for protection and success. The Pacific here can be unpredictable, with strong currents and surprisingly cool temperatures, even in warmer regions. Holding your breath for extended periods, descending 20, 30, even 50 meters to pry these spiny mollusks from their rocky homes using simple tools, all while hoping a shark doesn't decide you look like an interesting snack. It's a job description that would make most modern thrill seekers pause. They weren't just diving for shells, they were diving for divine favor, for economic prosperity, for the very symbols that held their society together. And here's a strange detail that hints at the profound ritual significance of these shells, perhaps even before they were fully processed. Some iconographic scenes on Moche pottery appear to depict spondylus shells being fed or anointed with precious liquids, possibly even blood from sacrificial victims or revered animals. In these images, tiny streams of liquid flow towards us into the shells. It's as if the shells themselves were considered living entities or conduits that needed to be nourished or activated to maintain their power. Imagine a freshly harvested spondylus, its vibrant colors still hidden, being presented in a ritual and offered a symbolic drink. It's a bit like leaving cookies out for Santa, but with significantly higher stakes and a much weirder beverage choice. Once harvested, the shells begin their journey south. They are a valuable cargo, guarded closely. Back in the Moche valleys, their arrival would be a significant event. You can picture the excitement, the relief, the anticipation. These aren't just raw materials. They are imbued with the power of the ocean, the danger of their acquisition, and the spiritual energy of their distant origins. Now, the artisans take over. The shells, rough and spiny on the outside, need to be carefully cleaned and worked. You're in a Moche workshop now, the air filled with the sound of scraping, grinding, and drilling. The artisans are patient, their hands skilled. They might use stone tools, obsidian blades, or even fine copper implements. They know the shell intimately, where to cut, how to polish, how to bring out the deep reds, purples, and oranges that lie within the spiny exterior. It's a transformative process, turning a natural object into a cultural artifact. Beads are drilled one by one, flat pieces are cut and shaped for inlay work, destined to be set alongside turquoise, mother of pearl, and gold. Some shells might be kept whole, polished to a high sheen, their natural form revered. You see a master craftsman examining a particularly large spondylus, perhaps deciding how best to utilize its unique colors and shape. There's a quiet intensity to the work, a sense of purpose. These aren't just pretty objects they're creating. They're crafting the very symbols of power and cosmic order. One slip, and a month's worth of diving and travel could be ruined. No pressure, right? This leads us to a scholarly debate concerning the actual reach and capabilities of Moche maritime activities. While their mastery of coastal waters for fishing and short-range trade is undisputed, the extent to which they engaged in true long-distance ocean voyaging, perhaps even reaching as far as Mesoamerica, or having more direct control over the spondylus beds in Ecuador, is still discussed. Were Moche merchants or state-sponsored expeditions making regular organized trips specifically for spondylus, managing complex logistics and diplomacy with groups in Ecuador? Or was the trade more indirect, passing through multiple intermediary groups along the coast? The evidence, often reliant on the distribution of Moche ceramics and the presence of spondylus, is open to interpretation. Understanding the true nature of their sea lanes is key to understanding the Moche economy and their sphere of influence. Were they coastal commuters or daring ocean explorers? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, a testament to their adaptability in a challenging yet bountiful maritime world. The rhythmic lapping of waves against the reed boat, the taste of salt on your lips, the sheer effort of it all underscores that these weren't just shells. They were hard-won trophies from a powerful, respected, and sometimes terrifying ocean. You're still immersed in that Moche workshop, the meticulous work of the artisans continuing around you. The air hums with a focused energy, a quiet dedication to transforming raw shell into something that speaks of power, divinity, and the very essence of Moche cosmology. It's not just about making pretty things, it's about embedding meaning into tangible forms. You see tiny, perfectly drilled, spondylus beads accumulating in a bowl, glowing like embers. These will become strands in a magnificent pectoral, or perhaps adorn the fringes of a ceremonial banner. Larger, flatter pieces of shell are being carefully shaped to fit into intricate mosaic patterns, destined for ear spools or the masks of deities. This is where the mainstream historical fact of Moche composite artistry truly shines. The Moche were masters of combining materials to enhance their symbolic power and aesthetic appeal. Spondylus shell, with its vibrant reds and oranges, was frequently paired with gleaming gold, deep blue turquoise, shimmering mother of pearl, and sometimes even lapis lazuli. Think of the famous ear spools from Saipan, incredible miniature masterpieces depicting warriors, deities, or animals, all rendered in a dazzling combination of these precious materials. The spondylus wasn't just one element, it was a key player in a symphony of color and texture, each material bringing its own symbolic weight. Gold represented the sun, eternity, turquoise, the sky, water, and life. Spondylus, with its blood-like hues and marine origin, connected all of this to the vital forces of the ocean and fertility. It was like the ultimate ancient bling, but each piece told a complex story, a far cry from just showing off your wealth. Though let's be honest, it did that too. You watch an artisan inlaying tiny, precisely cut pieces of spondylus and turquoise into a golden crescent, perhaps part of a headdress for a lord or a priest. The precision is astounding, especially considering the tools available. The finished objects weren't just beautiful, they were charged with meaning. When a Moche lord donned his full regalia, the ear spools, the nose ornament, the pectoral, the headdress, all blazing with gold and spondylus, he wasn't just dressing up. He was transforming into a conduit between the human world and the supernatural realm, his very appearance a statement of his power and his divine mandate. It's kind of like how a superhero's costume signifies their powers and identity, but with more direct access to the gods, and probably a lot more human sacrifice involved in the backstory. Now, let's touch upon a strange detail that reveals a fascinating aspect of Moche ritual practice concerning these precious objects. In many Moche burials, especially those of high-status individuals, valuable artifacts, including those made with spondylus, are often found ritually killed. This doesn't mean they were taken out back and roughed up. Instead, these objects were deliberately broken, bent, or perforated before being placed in the tomb. A perfectly crafted spondylus necklace might have its beads scattered, or a golden plaque might be ceremonially bent. The purpose of this practice is thought to be to release the object's spirit or energy, allowing it to accompany the deceased into the afterlife and preventing its power from being misused by the living, or perhaps to signify the end of its earthly function. It's a poignant gesture, like closing a chapter, ensuring these powerful items served their owner one last time on their journey beyond. Imagine breaking your iPhone before you're buried so its spirit can tweet from the great beyond. Different, yet oddly similar in intent. The meanings conveyed by these shells weren't just in the objects themselves, but also in their depictions in Moche art, especially their incredibly detailed fine-line pottery. Here, you see spondylus shells appearing in complex narrative scenes. They are presented as offerings to deities with fearsome fangs and elaborate headdresses. They are worn by warriors in ritual combat or by priests conducting ceremonies. Sometimes, the shells themselves seem to be active participants, almost characters in these mythological dramas. You might see a strombus shell trumpet being blown by a deity, its sound visualized as powerful volutes, or spondylus shells raining down from the heavens as a sign of divine favor. This rich iconography leads to a persistent scholarly debate. How literally should we interpret these Moche ceramic scenes featuring shells and other elements? Are they direct representations of actual rituals and historical events, a sort of visual chronicle? Or are they primarily mythological narratives, allegories conveying core beliefs and social structures, much like the myths of ancient Greece or Rome? Some scholars argue for a more literal reading, suggesting that scenes of, say, spondylus presentation depict ceremonies that actually took place. Others land towards a more symbolic interpretation, seeing these scenes as visual metaphors for cosmic battles, agricultural cycles, or the foundations of Moche power. It's likely a bit of both. The Moche, like many ancient cultures, probably didn't draw a firm line between myth and reality, ritual, and daily life. Their art was a way to articulate their understanding of a world where the sacred was immanent in everything, especially in something as potent as a spondylus shell. Trying to neatly categorize their art into our modern boxes of history versus myth is like trying to explain a meme to your great-grandparents. The full context is everything. As you trace the intricate lines on a moche pot, depicting a figure offering a spondylus shell to a fanged deity, you realize you're looking at a visual language, one that spoke volumes to those who understood its symbols. The shell wasn't just a pretty object in the picture, it was a keyword, a hyperlink to a whole network of beliefs about life, death, power, and the forces that governed the universe. And the Moche were fluent, using these marine treasures to write their story not in words, but in art, ritual, and enduring symbols. You're beginning to see just how deeply these shells, especially the regal spondylus, were embedded in the Moche world, not just as art objects, but as active agents in their social and spiritual lives. The workshop, with its focused artisans, is just one node in a complex network of acquisition, production, and utilization. Now let's pull back a bit and consider how this shell economy, this shell ideology, permeated the very structure of Moche society. It's clear that not everyone got to wear the fancy spondylus ear spools or wave a strombus trumpet around. The mainstream historical fact is that Moche society was a highly hierarchical, a pyramid of power with lords and warrior priests at the apex, a middle stratum of administrators and artisans, and a broad base of farmers, fishers, and laborers. Control over precious, symbolically charged goods like spondylus shells, gold, and fine textiles was a key way the elite maintained and displayed their authority. These weren't just status symbols in the way a luxury car is today. They were considered tangible proof of a ruler's connection to the divine, his ability to mediate with the powerful forces of nature, and thus his right to rule. When you see a Moche lord adorned in spondylus, you're seeing a walking, talking assertion of cosmic order and his place within it. It's like wearing your resume, your divine right, and your entire stock portfolio as a single, very shiny outfit. Imagine a grand ceremony in one of the main plazas, perhaps at the Huaca de la Luna. The sun is high, the adobe walls blaze with color. The common folk are gathered at a respectful distance, while the elite, resplendent in their shell and gold regalia, enact ancient rituals. The air is thick with the sound of those conch shell trumpets, the rhythmic beat of drums, and perhaps chanting. Spondylus shells, whole or worked into offerings, are central to the proceedings. They are presented to costumed deities, perhaps to ensure a good harvest, a successful fishing season, or to appease the gods after an earthquake or flood. The vibrant red of the shell would stand out dramatically, a splash of sacred color symbolizing blood, life, and the vital connection to the watery realm from which all life, in their view, ultimately emerged. Access to these shells and the right to use them in such potent rituals was a jealously guarded privilege of the ruling class. Good luck trying to start your own spondylus-based religion in your backyard. It probably wouldn't end well. Now, let's delve into a particularly strange detail that hints at even more esoteric uses for these marine treasures. While spondylus was clearly valued for its visual splendor and symbolic weight, some researchers have proposed that powdered shell, possibly including spondylus or other specific types, might have been an ingredient in ritual concoctions or even psychoactive snuffs. We know from Moche iconography that priests and shamanic figures often consumed substances to enter trance states and communicate with the spirit world. Depictions of figures with visionary stares, often surrounded by supernatural beings, are common. While coca leaves were certainly used, it's plausible that other ingredients, including ritually significant shell material, might have been part of these potent recipes, enhancing the experience or adding their own symbolic power to the brew. Imagine a shaman preparing for a journey to the other world, carefully grinding spondylus into a fine powder, believing its essence would open a direct line to the sea deities. It's a far cry from your morning vitamin supplement. The distribution of these shells and the artifacts made from them also provides clues about the Moche political landscape. This leads us to a significant scholarly debate. Was the Moche civilization a single, unified state ruled from a central capital, or was it more of a collection of independent regional centers or chiefdoms that shared a common culture, religion, and artistic tradition but were politically autonomous? The pattern of spondylus distribution plays into this. If it were a highly centralized state, you might expect to see a more tightly controlled, top-down distribution of such a precious commodity. If it were a series of allied but independent polities, the patterns of trade and exchange might look different, perhaps more like a network of competing elites, all vying for these status markers. The truth is likely complex, perhaps shifting over the 700 years of Moche existence. Maybe some powerful valleys dominated for a time, centralizing control, while at other periods, power was more diffuse. Untangling Moche political structures without their own written histories is like trying to understand the office politics of a company based solely on who has the best stapler, suggestive, but not the whole story. What is clear is that spondylus wasn't just passively beautiful, it was an active player in the Moche political and religious theater. It helped define who was powerful, who had access to the gods, and who controlled the narrative of the cosmos. The effort to obtain it, the skill to transform it, and the rituals that surrounded it all reinforced the existing social order. You can imagine a young Moche individual seeing the dazzling displays of spondylus and gold on a high lord, understanding immediately the vast social and spiritual distance that separated them. These shells didn't just whisper of the sea, they shouted power. The gentle lapping of the distant ocean, a sound that might soothe us to sleep, was for the Moche a constant reminder of the source of some of their most potent symbols of authority and divine connection. You've journeyed through the heart of Moche society, witnessing how the radiant spondylus shell wasn't just a pretty trinket, but a cornerstone of power, faith, and social order. Its influence extended from the perilous depths where divers sought it, through the meticulous hands of artisans, to the grandest state ceremonies and the most intimate burial rites. The Moche world, in many ways, pulsed in time with the arrival and distribution of these marine treasures. Think about the sheer interconnectedness this fostered. The mainstream historical fact is that the spondylus trade network was ancient and incredibly extensive, stretching for thousands of kilometers along the Andean coast and even into the highlands. The Moche were significant players in this network, but they weren't its beginning or its end. This blood of the sea, as spondylus was sometimes metaphorically called, flowed between different cultures, linking disparate peoples through shared values and economic exchange for centuries before and after the Moche. It was a kind of pre-Columbian superhighway of symbolic goods, with spondylus as one of its most prized commodities. Imagine the stories these shells could tell if they could talk, tales of long voyages, bartered deals, and the passing of power from one hand to another, all up and down the coast. It was international relations, Moche style. Now, with anything so valuable and so highly sought after, there's always someone looking for a shortcut. And this brings us to a rather strange detail. Archaeologists have occasionally unearthed what can only be described as counterfeit spondylus. These are objects crafted from less precious materials, like common stone or even pottery, meticulously shaped and painted to resemble the vibrant red and orange hues of genuine spondylus. It suggests that the demand for spondylus, or at least its potent symbolism, occasionally outstripped the supply, or perhaps that some individuals of lesser status hired to display its associated prestige, even if they couldn't afford the real deal. It's the ancient equivalent of buying a knockoff designer handbag. You hope no one looks too closely at the stitching, or in this case, the distinct lack of genuine thorny oyster. The immense value and symbolic weight tied to spondylus naturally meant that any disruption to its supply or to the belief systems that upheld its importance could have had significant repercussions. The Moche civilization, for all its artistic brilliance and social complexity, eventually declined around 800 to 900 AD. The reasons for this decline are still the subject of intense scholarly debate. Was it primarily due to environmental catastrophe? Evidence suggests a period of extreme climatic instability, including a series of powerful El Niño events bringing devastating floods, followed by long droughts, which would have crippled their agricultural base and perhaps shaken faith in the rulers who were supposed to mediate with these very forces. Or did internal factors, such as social unrest, endemic warfare between competing Moche centers, or the rise of new political entities like the Wari, play a more decisive role? It's quite possible it was a perfect storm of factors. A major disruption in the spondylus trade, perhaps caused by environmental changes affecting the shell beds or by shifts in political power further north, could have undermined the Moche elite's authority, which was so heavily reliant on this sacred commodity. If the shells stopped coming, or if the rituals no longer seemed to appease the angry gods of weather, the ideological glue holding society together might have begun to dissolve. The shimmer of spondylus, once a symbol of divine connection and stable power, might have started to lose its luster in an era of chaos and uncertainty. The ocean, their constant companion and provider of sacred symbols, might have ultimately proven too powerful and unpredictable even for the resourceful Moche. As you stand on this precipice of change, the desert wind seems to carry a different tune, a lament for a golden age passing into legend. The wind whispers around you, carrying the dust of centuries, and with it, the echoes of the Moche decline. You've witnessed their zenith, their intricate dance with spondylus shells, power, and belief. But all civilizations, like the tides, eventually recede. The Grand Moche centers, with their towering huacas and vibrant murals, gradually fell silent around 800 to 900 AD. The plazas where lords once displayed their spondylus-laden regalia grew quiet. The artisan workshops emptied. Yet the story of seashells in ancient Peru doesn't end here. The Moche may have faded, but their reverence for these marine treasures cast a long, shimmering shadow. Imagine yourself in the centuries following the Moche. The landscape is still familiar, the arid coast, the Pacific's rhythmic pulse. But new powers are rising, new cultures are taking root, and what you find is that the obsession with spondylus, far from vanishing, continued and in some cases even intensified. This is a key mainstream historical fact. Successor cultures like the Lambayeque, also known as the Sican culture, flourishing from around 750 to 1375 AD, and later the powerful Chimu Empire, which dominated the north coast until the Inca conquest in the 15th century, inherited and elaborated upon many Moche traditions, especially the ceremonial use of spondylus shells and precious metals. The Lambayeque, for instance, produced breathtaking gold funerary masks, often inlaid with spondylus and other shells, and their iconography is rich with marine symbolism. The Chimu, with their vast capital at Chan Chan, also decked their elites in shell and gold, demonstrating that the allure of spondylus was a deeply ingrained Andean tradition, too potent to simply disappear with one culture's decline. It was like a hit song that just kept getting remixed by new artists, each adding their own flair but keeping the core melody. You sift through the sands of time, fast forwarding to a much later era, the age of archaeological discovery, the late 19th and 20th centuries. It's here that the Moche and their shell-centric world begin to be painstakingly pieced back together. Early explorers and archaeologists, drawn by tales of lost cities and buried gold, began to excavate the great huacas. And this is where a rather strange detail, or perhaps a sad one, emerges. In the initial rush for spectacular finds, many early excavators, and certainly tomb looters, huaqueros, were primarily focused on objects of intrinsic Western value, gold, silver, and perhaps fine pottery. Seashells, even exquisitely worked spondylus, were often overlooked, discarded, or considered secondary to the gleaming metals. This led to an initially skewed understanding of Moche culture, one that underemphasized the profound symbolic and economic importance of these marine materials. It's like judging a Michelin star meal solely by the silverware, missing the artistry of the food itself. Thankfully, more systematic and scientific archaeology has since corrected this, revealing the true, central role of shells. You can almost feel the quiet excitement of a modern archaeologist brushing away centuries of dust to reveal a Moche tomb untouched by looters. The air in the newly opened chamber is stale, heavy with the scent of ancient earth. And there, amidst the pottery, the copper artifacts, and perhaps the skeletal remains of a long-dead lord, lie the spondylus shells, necklaces, pectorals, inlays, still retaining their subtle luster after 1,000 years. Each find is a puzzle piece, helping to reconstruct the Moche worldview. The careful recording of not just what is found, but how it's arranged, its context, allows us to glimpse the rituals, the beliefs, the social structures that valued these shells more than just simple decoration. The transition from Moche to these later cultures, like Lambayeque, is still a topic of scholarly debate. Was it a smooth, gradual cultural evolution, with Moche traditions seamlessly blending into new forms? Or was there a more abrupt shift, perhaps involving conflict, migration, or the imposition of new ruling elites, who then adopted and adapted existing Moche symbols of power, like spondylus, to legitimize their own rule? The continuity of spondylus use is a fascinating thread in this debate. Does it point to direct cultural inheritance, and a largely peaceful transition, or was it a case of new management recognizing a good thing when they saw it and co-opting a powerful existing symbol? The answer probably involves elements of both, a complex interplay of persistence and change. As is so often the case in human history, it's rarely a clean break, more like a messy creative handover. The discovery of sites like Sipan in the 1980s, with its unlooted royal tombs filled with an astonishing wealth of gold, silver, and spondylus artifacts, revolutionized our understanding of the Moche. It was like finding the Moche crown jewels and realizing that seashells were right there alongside the gold, equally, if not more, esteemed. These discoveries brought the Moche world vividly to life, showcasing the incredible artistry and the profound symbolic systems that underpinned their society, with the humble seashell playing a starring, rather glamorous role. The journey of these shells, from the ocean depths to the artisan's bench, to the tomb of a lord, and finally to the museum display case, is a testament to their enduring power to fascinate and inform. You're now in a place of reflection, looking back not just with the eyes of imagination, but through the lens of modern understanding. The Moche left no written texts to explain their shell obsession, no instruction manuals for their spondylus-centric rituals. So how do we, centuries removed, decipher these ancient meanings? It's a meticulous process, blending archaeological discovery with scientific analysis and careful interpretation, allowing the shells themselves to speak. One of the most fascinating ways we learn more is through mainstream historical fact, like the application of scientific techniques such as isotopic analysis on the spondylus shells themselves. By examining the chemical composition of a shell, specifically the ratios of isotopes like oxygen and strontium, scientists can often trace its geographic origin, pinpointing the specific region of the ocean where the mollusk grew. This is like a made-in label at a molecular level. It provides concrete evidence for the vast trade networks, confirming that shells found in Moche tombs in Peru indeed originated from the warmer waters of Ecuador, hundreds of kilometers away. It validates the tales of long-distance procurement, transforming what was once inference into hard data. No more guessing if they just found some really ambitious local shells. These were well-traveled mollusks. You find yourself in a modern museum exhibit, gazing at Moche artifacts behind protective glass. The lighting is subdued, highlighting the intricate details of a spondylus bead necklace or a gold pectoral inlaid with shell. Curators and researchers have spent countless hours studying these objects, comparing them, cross-referencing them with iconographic scenes on pottery and with data from excavations. It's like being a detective in a very, very cold case. You see, beyond just admiring their beauty, scholars try to understand the grammar of Moche art, to learn how symbols like spondylus were combined with other elements to create meaning. Was a shell held in the right hand different in meaning from one held in the left? Did the number of spines on a depicted spondylus matter? These are the kinds of questions that keep Indianists up at night, probably with a strong cup of coffee, not a ritual shell concoction. Now for a strange detail that connects the deep past to more recent times. While Moche culture as a distinct entity vanished long ago, some subtle echoes of ancient Andean reverence for shells and the sea have persisted in the beliefs and practices of certain contemporary indigenous communities in the Andes. Of course, these traditions have evolved and been syncretized with other influences over centuries, but occasionally anthropologists and ethnographers document rituals or folk beliefs involving specific types of shells or sacred sites near the ocean that hint at very ancient cultural underpinnings. It's a delicate subject, and one must be careful not to oversimplify or romanticize, but it does suggest that the deep symbolic resonance of these marine objects, so powerful for the Moche, may have left faint, transformed traces that lingered for millennia. It's like finding a few familiar notes from an ancient song woven into a completely new musical composition. The interpretation of complex Moche iconography, especially scenes heavily featuring shells but lacking any accompanying text, remains a fertile ground for scholarly debate. Take, for instance, recurring figures known as strombus attendants, or shell-bearing messengers. These are often depicted as anthropomorphic beings, sometimes with bird-like attributes, carrying large strombus conch shells or spondylus. They appear in scenes of sacrifice, in processions, or interacting with major deities. But what exactly is their role? Are they priests, supernatural intermediaries, personified messages, or something else entirely? Scholars propose various interpretations based on their context, associated symbols, and comparisons with other Andean belief systems, but a definitive consensus remains elusive. Each new discovery can shift the debate, adding another layer of complexity to these enigmatic shell-bearers. They're like the mysterious, recurring characters in a TV series whose true motives you can never quite pin down. Looking at these artifacts, you appreciate not just the Moche's artistry, but the intellectual journey of rediscovering their world. It's a testament to human curiosity, our desire to connect with those who came before us, to understand their lives and what mattered to them. The spondylus shells, once symbols of power and divine connection for the Moche, now serve as luminous fragments of their story, allowing us to piece together a narrative of a people who found profound meaning and extraordinary beauty in the gifts of the sea. They remind us that value is culturally constructed, and that something as seemingly simple as a seashell can, in the right hands and with the right beliefs, become a cornerstone of a civilization. The soft glow of the exhibit lights on a polished spondylus seems to bridge the centuries, a quiet link to that distant desert coast. And so, your journey through the world of the Moche and their multifaceted relationship with seashells draws towards its gentle close. You've walked their sun-baked plazas, peered into the artisan's workshop, and imagined the perilous journeys to procure the ocean's spiny crimson treasures. What started as a simple curiosity about seashells as more than decoration has unfolded into a story of power, belief, artistry, and a profound connection to the natural world. The legacy of the Moche, particularly their stunning craftsmanship, endures. A mainstream historical fact is that Moche artifacts, from their incredibly realistic portrait pottery to their exquisite metalwork, and of course, their sophisticated use of spondylus and other shells, are now recognized internationally as masterpieces of ancient art. You can find them in the collections of major museums around the globe, from Lima to New York, Paris to Berlin. These objects serve as ambassadors for a lost world, offering glimpses into the complexity and sophistication of pre-Columbian Andean civilizations, challenging earlier, often Eurocentric, views of ancient American cultures. They're not just relics, they're testaments to a unique artistic vision, a vibrant cultural heritage that continues to inspire awe. It's pretty impressive for a civilization that didn't have TikTok to show off their creations. Yet, for all we've learned, the Moche world still holds its secrets, buried beneath the Peruvian desert sands. And this leads to a strange detail, or perhaps a recurring modern phenomenon: the serendipitous discovery of Moche sites or artifacts. Sometimes it's a farmer plowing a field, or a construction crew laying foundations for a new building, or even a coastal erosion event that unexpectedly reveals a long forgotten tomb or a fragment of a mural. Each such find, however small, can be a vital clue, adding a new sentence or even a new paragraph to the Moche story. It's a reminder that the past is never truly static. It's constantly being uncovered, reinterpreted, and expanded. It's like the desert itself is slowly exhaling these ancient secrets, one artifact at a time. The quest to fully understand the Moche, especially their intricate iconography and the precise meanings they attach to shells like spondylus, remains an ongoing endeavor. This isn't so much a single debate as a continuous scholarly exploration. New technologies, new comparative studies with other Andean cultures, and crucially, new archaeological discoveries constantly refine our understanding. While we can now outline the broad strokes of spondylus's importance, its connection to water, fertility, status, and ritual, the nuances of specific myths, the identities of all the deities, the full vocabulary of their visual language, still offer many avenues for research. The Moche didn't leave us a Rosetta Stone for their symbols, so every interpretation is hard won. It's a grand, collaborative puzzle, and perhaps that's part of its enduring allure. The sense that there's always more to discover, another layer to peel back. As you stand at the edge of this ancient world, the sound of the distant Pacific, a gentle whisper, you can appreciate how the Moche took a simple product of the sea and imbued it with layers of meaning so profound that it shaped their society and echoed for centuries after them. They saw in the spondylus shell not just a beautiful object, but a reflection of life's vital forces, a conduit to the sacred, and a symbol worthy of their highest artistry and deepest reverence. It's a powerful reminder of humanity's enduring need to find meaning, to create beauty, and to connect with the world around us in ways that transcend the purely utilitarian. The Moche may be long gone, but their story, etched in gold, clay, and the enduring shimmer of seashells, continues to resonate, a quiet murmur from the sands of time. Relaxation. Now, as our journey into the world of the Moche and their precious seashells gently fades, allow your mind to drift. Let the images of sun-baked pyramids and vibrant coastal deserts soften and blur. The rhythmic sounds of the ancient artisans, the distant call of the conch shell trumpet, all begin to recede like waves pulling back from the shore, leaving only a peaceful calm. Feel the weight of your body surrendering to the surface beneath you. Let your shoulders soften, your jaw unclench, your hands rest loosely by your sides. With each slow, easy breath, imagine any lingering tension dissolving, like footprints in the sand being smoothed by a gentle tide. Inhale calm, exhale any thoughts of the day. The desert night you imagined was vast and quiet, and you can bring that sense of spacious stillness into your own space now. The intricate details of spondylus shells, their fiery colors and spiny forms, now become soft, abstract patterns swirling gently in the background of your mind. There's nothing to analyze, nothing to understand, just a peaceful appreciation for the beauty that was and the quiet that is. The efforts of the divers, the skill of the craftsmen, the power of the lords, these stories have been told, and now it is time for rest. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing be your anchor. In and out. A slow, peaceful cadence. Feel the air as it enters, cool and refreshing, and as it leaves, warm and carrying away any remaining restlessness. The ancient world is slipping further away now, replaced by the simple, comfortable reality of your own quiet room. The darkness is a comforting blanket, the gentle hum of a fan, if you have one, a soothing lullaby. There are no more facts to learn, no more debates to ponder, only the gentle invitation to sleep. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are at peace. Allow yourself to drift deeper and deeper into that peaceful state, letting go completely. Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep into a world where your wardrobe could get you into serious trouble. Imagine scrolling through your social media feed, bombarded by influencers in the most outrageously vibrant look-at-me outfits. Now picture a time and place where even a slightly too bright kimono could land you in hot water with the authorities. We're talking about Edo, Japan, a period from the early 17th to the mid-19th century, and their fascinatingly strict sumptuary laws. You, with your love for that limited edition graphic tee or those glittery sneakers, you probably wouldn't have survived this era of enforced subtlety. It's a world where conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was the law. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, so drop a comment below. Now, turn off your lights, maybe get a fan going for some gentle noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You find yourself stepping not onto a modern, bustling street, but onto a packed dirt road in the city of Edo, which we now know as Tokyo. The year is, let's say, 1785. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, street food, and the faint, earthy scent of the nearby Sumida River. Around you, the sounds are a symphony of wooden sandals, or gaita, clacking on the packed earth, vendors hawking their wares in melodic calls, and the distant rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It's a vibrant city, teeming with life, yet there's an undercurrent, a sense of quiet regulation that hangs in the air, almost like an unspoken humidity. You're not you, of course, not the you of today. You are a merchant, perhaps, or an artisan. You've had a reasonably good year. Your business is doing well. You're thinking about commissioning a new kimono. Nothing too ostentatious, of course, but something that reflects your modest success. But this is where it gets tricky. The Tokugawa shogunate, the military government that has ruled Japan for over a century and a half, has a very keen interest in what you're wearing. These are the sumptuary laws, a complex web of edicts and regulations designed to control consumption and reinforce the rigid social hierarchy. Think of it as a nationwide dress code, but with much higher stakes than a detention slip. These laws weren't just about kimonos. They covered everything. The size and materials of your house, the type of hairpin you could use, the toys your children could play with, even the food you could serve at a wedding. The primary goal, as the shogunate saw it, was to maintain order and prevent social unrest by ensuring everyone knew their place. The samurai were at the top, followed by farmers, artisans, and then merchants at the bottom of the official Neo-Confucian hierarchy, though ironically, merchants were often the ones with the most disposable income. This financial power of the merchant class, or chonin, was a source of considerable anxiety for the ruling samurai, who, despite their high status, often faced financial difficulties. It's like that quiet kid in class who suddenly starts acing all the tests. Makes the established top students a bit nervous, doesn't it? So you wander through a cloth merchant's district. The shops are open-fronted, displaying bolts of fabric. But you notice the colors are subdued. Lots of browns, grays, indigo blues. You might see some patterns, small geometric designs perhaps, or subtle stripes. Anything too bold, too large, or using too many bright colors, especially gold or silver thread, or certain shades of red or purple, could be forbidden for someone of your social standing. It's a far cry from the elaborate, almost theatrical costumes you might associate with historical Japan from movies or kabuki theater. In fact, kabuki actors and courtesans who were outside the strict social hierarchy often became trendsetters, pushing the boundaries of fashion much to the chagrin of the authorities. Their flamboyance was tolerated, even admired, but strictly off limits for the general populace. You run your hand over a bolt of silk. It's smooth, but not the most luxurious kind. That would be reserved for the higher echelons of the samurai class or the imperial court. You might be allowed cotton or perhaps a lower grade silk. The shopkeeper, a man with a keen eye for both fabric quality and the local magistrate's informants, would guide you carefully. Ah, for a respected craftsman such as yourself, he might say, his voice a low hum. This indigo-dyed cotton with the discreet kiko and tortoiseshell pattern would be most suitable, very tasteful, very appropriate. He's basically your 18th century fashion consultant and legal advisor rolled into one. Historians still debate whether the frequent issuance of these sumptuary laws indicates their widespread success or their constant violation. After all, if everyone was following the rules, why keep restating them with increasing fervor? It suggests a constant cat-and-mouse game between a populace eager for a little bit of finery and a government determined to keep a lid on things. It's like when your parents told you no snacks before dinner, but the cookie jar seemed to magically deplete itself anyway. One particularly quirky detail is the prohibition on certain types of kanzashi, or hairpins. An overly ornate hairpin, perhaps one made of tortoiseshell with intricate carvings or dangling silver ornaments, could be seen as an unacceptable display of wealth for a commoner woman. Imagine being fined because your hair accessory was deemed too fabulous. It makes you wonder how they even enforced some of these rules. Did they have fashion police measuring the length of your kimono sleeves or the intricacy of your comb? Well, in a way, yes. There were local officials and a strong culture of mutual surveillance among neighbors who might report infractions. It wasn't necessarily SWAT teams raiding homes for illegal silk, but the social pressure and the threat of fines or even, in extreme cases, confiscation of property was a powerful deterrent, or at least it was meant to be. You consider a simple wooden comb, its beauty in its unadorned simplicity. Perhaps this is the way to go, stylish yet safe. You decide to ponder it a little longer, the weight of societal expectation settling on your shoulders like a heavy but impeccably plain cloak. Okay, so you're there, in 18th century Edo, the faint scent of cedar from a nearby carpenter's shop now mingling with the food stalls, still mulling over that simple wooden comb. The pressure to conform, to be appropriately understated, is immense. It's not just about avoiding a fine, it's about maintaining well, or social harmony, a concept deeply ingrained in Japanese society. To stand out too much was to invite scrutiny, not just from officials, but from your own community. It's a bit like that feeling when you accidentally wear a truly outrageous outfit to a very conservative family gathering. All eyes on you, and not necessarily in a good way. The roots of these sumptuary laws, these kenyakure, thrift edicts, go deep. The Tokugawa shogunate was built on a Neo-Confucian ideology that emphasized social order, filial piety, and frugality. Extravagance, especially among the lower classes, was seen not just as wasteful, but as a sign of moral decay and a threat to the established hierarchy. If merchants started dressing like daimyo, feudal lords, what would be next? Farmers demanding voting rights? It was a slippery slope argument, Edo style. The shogunate also had practical economic concerns. Japan was a largely closed country, sakoku, at this time, with limited foreign trade. Resources needed to be carefully managed. If too much wealth was poured into fancy clothes and elaborate houses for commoners, it could, in theory, divert resources from more important things, like supporting the samurai class, who, despite their high status, were often cash poor. You can almost hear the shogunate officials muttering, "We can't have the rice farmers spending all their koku on silk robes when the samurai need new swords, can we?" One of the key mainstream historical facts about these laws is that their intensity often waxed and waned. They weren't static. Major periods of reform, like the Kansei reforms, late 1780s to 1790s, under Matsudaira Sadanobu, or later the Tenpo reforms, 1830 to 1840, saw a significant crackdown. These reforms often followed periods of famine, natural disasters, or perceived social decadence. The logic was a bit like a societal cleanse. Times are tough, everyone tighten their belts, literally and figuratively, show some moral fiber, and maybe the gods will stop sending earthquakes. Or more practically, social unrest due to hardship could be tamped down by reinforcing austerity. It's like when your Wi-Fi is slow, and the first thing tech support tells you is to unplug everything and plug it back in. A reset, hoping for better behavior. But here's where human ingenuity and the desire for a little bit of beauty or self-expression gets really interesting. People in Edo became masters of subtle rebellion, of finding loopholes. This gave rise to an aesthetic known as iki, a sophisticated, understated chic. It was about being fashionable without being flashy, about finding elegance in simplicity, often with a hint of playful nonconformity. Think of it as the original stealth wealth. You couldn't wear bright, bold patterns on the outside? Fine. You'd commission a kimono with an absolutely plain, regulation-approved exterior, but the inner lining, the part only you or perhaps a close friend might glimpse, could be made of stunning, expensive, and technically forbidden imported fabrics or hand-painted with exquisite designs. It was a secret thrill, a personal luxury, the equivalent of wearing novelty socks with your most serious business suit. This extended to architecture too. A merchant couldn't build a massive, ostentatious mansion that rivaled a samurai's residence. The laws were quite specific about the size of gates, the types of roofing tiles, and whether you could even have a second story visible from the main street. So what did they do? They built deceptively simple-looking houses from the outside, but step inside and you might find an exquisite inner garden, intricate woodwork, rooms with beautiful tatami mats, and painted screens, all hidden from public view. One quirky detail is that some wealthy merchants would have a very plain public-facing part of their house, but deeper within the plot, sometimes accessed through a series of unassuming corridors, were lavish private quarters. It was all about curated appearances. Historians still debate whether this culture of iki and hidden luxury was a genuine embrace of subtle aesthetics or simply a clever workaround born of necessity, a quiet defiance against an oppressive system. Were they truly appreciating the beauty of a single, perfectly placed camellia in a plain vase, or just making the best of a bad, no bling allowed situation? You can imagine the scene. Two merchant wives meeting in the street, both dressed in muted browns or grays, and one might subtly flash the inside of her sleeve, revealing a sliver of brilliant red silk. A silent acknowledgement, a shared secret. It wasn't just about the fabric itself, but the connoisseurship, the ability to appreciate these subtle details. The artisans who catered to this demand were incredibly skilled. Dyers developed techniques for creating complex shades of brown and gray, shijuhacha hyakunozumi, meaning 48 browns and 100 grays, each with its own nuanced beauty. Weavers created intricate textures that only revealed their richness upon close inspection. It was an entire aesthetic ecosystem built around and in quiet opposition to these restrictive laws. So that plain wooden comb you were considering, perhaps you'd choose one made from a rare, subtly fragrant wood, polished to a sheen that only a true connoisseur would recognize as exceptional. It's not breaking the law, not really. It's just appreciating quality, right? You try to convince yourself, even as the shadow of a passing samurai patrolman falls briefly over the street. Better stick to something undeniably, unequivocally plain. For now. Right, so the fancy comb is a no-go, at least for today. That brief shadow of the patrolman, real or imagined, was enough to make you reconsider any purchase that might attract even a moment's unwanted attention. You shuffle along, the wooden slats of your gaita making a soft, rhythmic koran sound on the packed earth. The desire for that little bit of personal flair, that tiny expression of individuality, bumps up against the very real need to just blend in. It's like wanting to dye your hair a vibrant blue when your school has a strict, natural colors only policy. The urge is there, but the potential hassle, maybe not worth it. It's worth pondering who exactly bore the brunt of these sumptuary laws. While they technically applied to all classes below the samurai, the rapidly growing merchant class, the chonin, were frequent targets. They were the new money, the entrepreneurs of Edo, and their increasing wealth often outstripped that of their supposed social superiors, the samurai. This made the shogunate very nervous. Imagine a society where the people with the actual cash couldn't overtly enjoy it, while those with the status often struggled to make ends meet. It's a recipe for social tension. Artisans, too, felt the pinch. While some found incredible creativity and subtlety, as we've discussed, others surely felt constrained. Their skills in creating vibrant colors or bold designs officially undervalued or even forbidden for their primary clientele. A significant mainstream historical fact to remember is that these laws weren't just handed down as dry legal texts. There was a strong element of moral suasion involved. Edicts were often posted publicly on wooden boards in prominent places and would sometimes include explanations, framing frugality not just as a legal requirement, but as a Confucian virtue. It was a form of public education, or perhaps more accurately, state propaganda, designed to convince people that simplicity was good for the soul, good for society, and pleasing to the heavens. Be thrifty, be humble, be orderly, the unspoken message read, and everything will be fine. It's the kind of message that makes you want to go out and buy the loudest, most obnoxious Hawaiian shirt you can find, just out of principle. And it wasn't just the city-dwelling merchants and artisans. Farmers, who formed the backbone of Japan's agrarian economy and were theoretically ranked second in the social hierarchy, samurai, farmer, artisan, merchant, also lived under strict sumptuary rules. Their clothing was expected to be made of practical, coarse materials like hemp or cotton, usually dyed with simple indigo. Anything finer might imply they were neglecting their fields, or worse, aspiring above their station. A farmer in a silk kimono would be as out of place and as alarming to the authorities as a fish riding a bicycle. The focus was on utility and clear demarcation of social roles. Now for a rather quirky detail from this era, the fascinating world of used or second-hand clothing. While a wealthy merchant might not be able to commission a new robe of luxurious silk brocade, it was sometimes possible to acquire such a garment pre-owned, perhaps from a financially distressed samurai family. This was a delicate gray area. The item itself was still technically above the merchant's station, but the fact that it was second-hand, perhaps slightly worn, or cleverly altered to appear a bit less grand, maybe a too bright section was overdyed, or an ostentatious family crest removed, could sometimes allow it to pass muster. It was the Edo period equivalent of scoring a designer dress at a thrift store, only with the added frisson of potentially getting into serious legal trouble. You can imagine the hushed negotiations, the careful inspection of the garment for signs of its previous, more noble life. Historians still debate whether the samurai who sold these garments felt deep shame at parting with symbols of their status, or if it was simply a pragmatic, albeit discreet, way to pay off debts in an increasingly commercialized economy. It adds another layer to the "who's really wealthy here?" question. You can almost feel the scratchiness of a farmer's hempwork clothes, practical and enduring, smelling faintly of earth and sweat. Then contrast that with the illicit softness of a borrowed silk robe, hidden away perhaps, only brought out for very private enjoyment, its faint scent of old incense and aristocratic closets a secret indulgence. The sumptuary laws, in trying to control everything, inadvertently created this fascinating undercurrent of desire, of hidden meanings, and of complex social navigations. It's a reminder that human beings are remarkably adept at finding ways to express themselves, even when the rules are stacked against them. Trying to explain to an Edo-era official that people in the future would pay extra for jeans that are already ripped and faded? Their powdered wigs might just spontaneously combust from the sheer illogic of it. For them, visible wear and tear was a sign of your station or your thrift, not a fashion statement. The pressure was to appear appropriately, and often plainly, attired according to your lot in life. It's a far cry from today's fast fashion, where trends change with bewildering speed and personal expression through clothing is, for many, a celebrated freedom. As Act 1 of our journey into Edo's fashion police state draws to a close, you're left with this lingering sense of a society draped in enforced modesty, yet shimmering underneath with secret desires and ingenious acts of quiet, fabric-based defiance. So, you're beginning to get a feel for this world, aren't you? This Edo period, with its quiet streets, at least in terms of flashy fashion, and its undercurrent of constant, low-level sartorial anxiety. It's one thing to know about these sumptuary laws, these rules against peacocking, but it's another to imagine living them, day in and day out. The sheer effort of remembering what you, in your current social guise, are allowed to wear, what materials are permissible, what patterns won't get you a one-way ticket to a stern lecture or worse. Forget, does this make me look fat? The question is, does this make me look like I'm trying to be a feudal lord? Now let's delve into the how. How did the Tokugawa shogunate actually keep tabs on everyone's kimonos and hairpins? It wasn't just a matter of a few grumpy officials wandering around with fabric swatches and measuring tapes, though that probably happened too. A key mechanism for control, a truly mainstream historical fact of Edo society, was the Gonengumi system. These were compulsory neighborhood associations, typically consisting of 5 households, although the number could vary. These groups were collectively responsible for the conduct of their members. Think of it as an officially mandated neighborhood watch, but with the added responsibility of ensuring everyone paid their taxes, didn't commit crimes, and yes, adhered to the endless stream of regulations, including those pesky sumptuary laws. It's like having an HOA that can also get you arrested for having too fancy a mailbox, or in this case, too luxurious an OB. Imagine your neighbors, the people you share a cup of sake with, or whose children play with yours, are also, in a way, your first line of policing. If someone in your Gonengumi decided to flaunt a brightly colored silk kimono that was clearly above their station, the whole group could potentially face repercussions. This fostered a powerful culture of mutual surveillance and social pressure. You wouldn't want to be the reason your neighbors got into trouble, would you? The shame, the seikante, or concern for one's reputation in the eyes of the community was a potent force. It often meant that the laws were, to a degree, self-enforcing at the local level. Before an official even needed to get involved, a quiet word from the head of your Gonengumi or a few pointed glances from your neighbors might be enough to ensure that an overly ostentatious garment was discreetly put away. "Hey, Tanaka-san," your neighbor might lean over the fence and say, his voice low, "That's a lovely shade of purple on your new kimono. Almost imperial, wouldn't you say? The magistrate's been in a bit of a mood lately. Message received." The consequences for being caught breaking these laws varied. For minor infractions, it might be a warning or a fine. The offending item, that beautiful silk you saved up for, or that intricately carved comb, could be confiscated. Imagine the quiet heartbreak of seeing your treasured possession snipped or taken away. For more serious or repeated offenses, especially if they were seen as deliberately challenging authority, the penalties could escalate. Public shaming was a common tactic. This could involve having your name and offense posted on a public notice board. In more extreme cases, for high-profile commoners or even lower-ranking samurai who overspent, punishments could include house arrest, confiscation of a significant portion of property, or even, though rarely just for clothing, banishment from the city. It made getting dressed in the morning less about what matches and more about what doesn't scream, "Arrest me." One of the slightly quirky, or perhaps just depressingly meticulous, aspects of this enforcement could be the sheer level of detail in some edicts. You might find regulations specifying the maximum permissible width of an obi for a merchant's wife, or the type of wood that could be used for a commoner's gaita sandals. Officials might even carry small guides or reference materials. There are accounts of gatekeepers at the entrances to certain city districts or at checkpoints who would scrutinize people's attire. It's the kind of bureaucratic dedication to minutiae that's both impressive and a little terrifying. Historians still debate the actual extent and uniformity of enforcement across different domains and time periods within the Edo era. Were officials in the bustling urban centers of Edo and Osaka more vigilant, or perhaps more overwhelmed, and therefore occasionally more lax, compared to those in quieter rural domains? And did the various daimyo interpret and enforce the shogunate's general edicts with differing degrees of severity? It likely varied quite a bit, creating a patchwork of compliance and evasion across the country. You can just picture the scene. You've finally decided on a new kimono, something you hope is acceptably subdued. You wear it out for the first time, your heart doing a little tap dance of anxiety with every person who looks your way. Is the weave too fine? Is this particular shade of brown considered a luxury brown? It's almost enough to make you want to just stay home in your oldest, most undeniably boring robe. The stress would be enough to make anyone an expert in the subtle art of looking just right. Not too poor, not too rich, just compliant. It's a far cry from today, where your biggest fashion worry might be whether your outfit is Instagram worthy. Back then, it was more about whether it was magistrate approved. You might not have official fashion informants in the modern sense, but the Gonengumi system ensured plenty of eyes were watching. Being an influencer in Edo, Japan would be a very different game. Hey guys, check out my latest regulation-approved hemp robe. Use code FRUGAL for 0% off because discounts are decadent. You're navigating this carefully controlled world where every thread, every pattern, every choice of material is freighted with social meaning and potential legal consequence. It's a constant hum beneath the surface of daily life. And remember, these sumptuary laws weren't just playing fashion police with your kimono. Oh no. They extended their meticulous, sometimes meddling, fingers into almost every aspect of life. The size and style of your house, as we touched upon. No grand gates or showy roof tiles for you, commoner-san. The kinds of food you could serve at celebrations, the types of toys your children could play with, even the extravagance of festivals and public entertainments were all subject to regulation. It was a society aiming for total social engineering through thrift. Can you imagine planning a wedding where the local government has to approve your catering menu for its level of humility? No, no. That third pickled plum is far too ostentatious. Tone it down. But here's where it gets particularly fascinating, and where a major mainstream historical fact comes into play. Some groups were deliberately exempt from these strictures, or at least operated under a very different set of rules. Kabuki actors, for instance, were celebrities, superstars of their day. On stage, they were permitted, even expected, to wear the most lavish, eye-popping costumes imaginable. Their depictions of historical figures, legendary heroes, or tragic lovers were a riot of color and texture that the average citizen could only dream of wearing. Similarly, courtesans in the officially licensed pleasure quarters, like the famous Yoshiwara district in Edo, were walking advertisements for high fashion. Their kimonos were works of art, bold designs, expensive dyes, intricate embroidery, all things strictly forbidden to ordinary women. Even sumo wrestlers with their imposing presence had a certain leeway in their attire and public persona. These exceptions served a complex purpose. They provided a controlled outlet for society's fascination with glamour and excess, a kind of safety valve. It also sharply demarcated these groups as existing outside the normal social hierarchy, making their flamboyance less of a direct challenge to the established order. They were the entertainers, the nightless city dwellers. Their world was explicitly not your world. Let's take a little detour in our minds into the Yoshiwara. As you approach, even from a distance, the atmosphere begins to change. The muted tones of everyday Edo might give way to a soft glow of lanterns, the air carrying the scent of expensive incense, sweet perfumes, and the faint, alluring aroma of costly sake and delicacies. You'd hear the distant, evocative twang of the shamisen, a three-stringed lute, its music weaving a spell of melancholy or playful invitation. Inside, it was a world designed to dazzle. The great tea houses and brothels were often opulent, albeit in a way that was still carefully managed, and the courtesans themselves, particularly the oiran or tayu, the highest ranks, were like living goddesses of fashion. Their kimonos were masterpieces, often costing astronomical sums, layered one upon another, with incredibly wide obi sashes tied in complex bows at the front, a distinction from ordinary women who tied them at the back. Their hair would be elaborately styled with numerous expensive kanzashi, tortoiseshell, coral, silver, and jade. It was a calculated display, a performance of beauty and luxury. The kabuki actors were the bad boys of fashion. The courtesans were the untouchable runway models. If you wanted to see cutting-edge, boundary-pushing style in Edo, Japan, these were the circles you'd carefully and expensively observe. One of the quirky details about Yoshiwara was the highly ritualized nature of interacting with high-ranking courtesans. It wasn't a simple transaction. It was a performance of status and connoisseurship for the wealthy merchants and even samurai who frequented the district. A man had to demonstrate his sophistication through his knowledge of poetry, music, or calligraphy, his generosity, and his adherence to complex etiquette. Simply having money wasn't always enough. You had to have style, even within this realm of sanctioned indulgence. The initial meetings often involved no physical intimacy at all, just conversation, artistic exchange, and copious amounts of expensive food and drink. It could take multiple expensive visits to even get to that stage. talk about playing the long game. Historians still debate whether the sanctioned opulence of places like the Yoshiwara ultimately reinforced the sumptuary system by providing a controlled outlet for transgressive desires, or if it subtly undermined it by showcasing the very luxury denied to ordinary citizens, thereby fueling resentment, aspiration, or a keener sense of what they were missing. Did seeing a top courtesan in her magnificent robes make a merchant's wife more content with her plain brown kimono, or did it make her dream of just a little more color in her own life? It's a strange paradox, isn't it? This incredibly rule-bound society creating these little pockets of almost theatrical rule-breaking. A trip to Yoshiwara for a wealthy merchant might have felt like stepping onto another planet, a place where the normal rules of drabness were gleefully suspended. It was perhaps the Edo equivalent of a celebrity who preaches minimalism, then gets caught on a private jet to a luxury island. A bit of a contradiction, but an understandable human impulse. The psychological weight of living under constant scrutiny, where your neighbor isn't just your neighbor, but also a potential fashion informant, must have been considerable. Did it breed a genuine appreciation for wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and simplicity in the general populace? Or did it just make people really, really good at hiding their secret stash of slightly too nice tea bowls? Probably a bit of both. The human spirit has a funny way of adapting, of finding joy and beauty even within the tightest constraints. But the desire for a little bit more, a little bit brighter, a little bit fancier, that's a hard thing to regulate out of existence entirely. All right, so we've glimpsed the dazzling, officially sanctioned extravagance of the kabuki stage and the lantern-lit alleys of Yoshiwara, places where the usual rules of drab decorum were spectacularly suspended. But what about everyone else? What about you, our ordinary Edo citizen, trying to navigate daily life without accidentally committing a fashion felony? If you couldn't wear a riot of color or drape yourself in gold threads, how did you express any sense of personal style or taste? Did everyone just resign themselves to looking like identical, modestly dressed sparrows? Well, not quite. Humans are resourceful, especially when it comes to looking good, or at least looking like themselves. This is where we see the rise of what you might call creative compliance. If the loud, obvious avenues of expression were closed off, people found quieter, more subtle pathways. If bold colors and large patterns were off limits for your outer kimono, then the focus shifted to other, less immediately apparent qualities. Texture, for example, became incredibly important. A kimono that appeared to be a simple, regulation brown from a distance might, on closer inspection, reveal an incredibly complex and luxurious weave. The way the light played on the fabric, the feel of it between your fingers, these became markers of quality and taste. This aligns with the Japanese aesthetic concept of shibui, which values simple, subtle, and unobtrusive beauty. It's the kind of elegance that doesn't shout, but rather whispers. So while you couldn't have a neon pink kimono, you could have a deceptively simple indigo one whose threads were woven with such skill that it shimmered with a dozen different shades of blue in the changing light. It's like the difference between a fast food hamburger and a perfectly crafted minimalist dish at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Both are food, but the artistry is in entirely different dimensions. A key mainstream historical fact here is the flourishing of highly sophisticated dyeing and weaving techniques that specialized in creating these subtle but deeply valued distinctions. Take Edo komen, for example. This was a stencil dyeing technique that produced incredibly fine repetitive patterns, tiny dots, minuscule geometric shapes, or stylized natural motifs. From a few feet away, a kimono dyed with Edo komen might appear to be a solid, unassuming color. But get closer, and a world of intricate detail would emerge. These patterns were often so fine that they were considered subtle enough to be permissible for commoners, yet they required immense skill and labor to produce, making them a quiet luxury. Each feudal domain, Han, even developed its own signature komen patterns, and wearing one could subtly indicate your origin or allegiance. Then there was kasuri, or ikat, where threads were resist dyed before weaving, creating characteristic slightly blurred or feathered patterns. Again, often in muted colors, but with a depth and artistry that was highly prized. It was a language of textiles that spoke in hushed tones, understood by those with a discerning eye. Beyond the main garments, personal accessories offered another small canvas for individual expression, albeit still within certain constraints. Netsuke, the carved toggles used to suspend small pouches, kinchaku, or tiered lacquer cases, inro, from the obi sash, became miniature works of art. These could be carved from wood, ivory, or stag antler, depicting everything from mythological creatures and folk heroes to everyday objects and humorous scenes. While an overly flashy netsuke made of solid gold might attract unwelcome attention, a beautifully carved wooden one displayed connoisseurship and personal taste without being overtly ostentatious. Similarly, inro themselves, often exquisitely lacquered, and even kisaru, tobacco pipes, with their metal fittings, could be subtle indicators of refinement. Even fans, essential in the humid Japanese summers, could be painted with delicate designs or calligraphy, allowing for a fleeting, graceful display of personal style with a flick of the wrist. It's like today, where some people might have a very plain phone case, but their custom pop socket is where their personality shines. Let's talk about a quirky detail. The world of hidden crests, or kakushi monjers, prominent family crests, or mon displayed on the shoulders or sleeves of kimonos, were strictly regulated by social status. You couldn't just slap your self-designed family logo on your outerwear if you were a merchant. However, some people would have smaller, more discreet, or even playful, punning versions of crests hidden on the linings of their garments or on personal items not meant for public display. It was a little secret, a nod to identity or affiliation that stayed within the bounds of propriety. Historians still debate the degree to which the widespread appreciation for these highly refined, subtle aesthetics was a genuine, deeply felt cultural preference across all commoner classes, or if it was primarily a preoccupation and a cultivated skill of the wealthier, more educated urban shonen, those who had the financial means, the leisure time, and the social connections to commission, understand, and appreciate such nuanced artistry. Was the average rice farmer also a connoisseur of 30 different shades of indigo? Perhaps not to the same extent as a prosperous Edo shop owner who might host poetry gatherings. It's almost comical to imagine the Edo equivalent of a modern influencer trying to showcase their style. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm unboxing this incredible new brown rectangle. But look at the subtle variation in the thread count in this bottom corner, and the way this particular shade of beige just pops under indirect lantern light. Use my code bland but beautiful for, well, nothing, because discounts are frowned upon. The pressure to conform, the endless rules, pushed craftsmanship to extraordinary heights in achieving beauty through extreme subtlety. It wasn't about being loud, it was about being incredibly, exquisitely quiet. Even your smoking pipe, that little accessory for a moment of personal pleasure, was expected to whisper rather than shout your status. No diamond-encrusted vape pens in old Ado, thank you very much. Just a well-made bamboo stem and a discreetly decorated metal bowl, perhaps.